Hey everyone, welcome back to the College Algebra playlist. In the previous two videos, we took a look at factoring. Alright, so we showed how to factor trinomials with a leading coefficient of 1, right? That's a special type of polynomial, right? And then we also showed how to factor out the GCF to factor more complicated polynomials. Okay, so in this video, we're talking about factoring again. All right, and this time we're looking at trinomials of the form ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, the leading coefficient, is not equal to 1. Okay, those trinomials are harder to factor, right? It's more of a challenge. So without further ado, let's just dive right into it. Okay, here we go. Factoring by grouping. When we're asked to factor a trinomial with a leading coefficient of 1, we know that we use trial and error to find the factors. Okay, so for example, if I'm asked to factor x squared plus 5x plus 6, I can try out a bunch of different possibilities and come up with this, right? The factors are x plus 3 and x plus 2. Okay, so we showed how to do this in a previous video. In this video, we're going to try to factor a trinomial with a leading coefficient other than 1. All right, to do that, we're going to use something called the AC method. Okay, factoring by grouping is a part of the AC method. All right, so we'll look at factoring by grouping itself first, all right, before diving into the AC method. Here's an example of the type of trinomial I'm talking about. 2x squared plus 5x plus 3. All right, how do we factor that? Let's take this to the top of the screen and use it as an example, all right, to show what factoring by grouping is. Okay, let's take a look at this middle term here, 5x. Let's split that into 2x plus 3x in blue here. All right. Then let's look at these two terms right here, 2x squared and 2x. Those terms have a GCF of 2x. All right. And these two terms have a GCF of 3. All right, so this is why it's called factoring by grouping. All right, we're grouping these two terms together and factoring them, and then grouping these two terms and factoring them. All right, so here in blue, what does this become? When we factor out the GCF of 2x, we're left with x plus 1. Okay, so 2x times x, right, that's 2x squared, and 2x times 1, right, that's 2x. All right, so we did a reverse distributive property, essentially. All right, we'll do the same thing here, right? We'll pull out the 3, right, and we'll see that we're left with x plus 1. Okay. Next step is to put these two things together with addition, right? This is a sum. Okay, so this trinomial equals this sum here. All right, let's take the sum to the top of the page. And then we notice that x plus 1 is a common factor in each term. All right, they both have x plus 1. So that's my GCF. All right, so what we're going to do is factor out that GCF, x plus 1, and ask ourselves what's left here, right? What do we put in these blanks? All right, x plus 1 times what equals 2x times x plus 1? The answer is obvious, right? It's just 2x. Okay, and then here we ask x plus 1 times what equals 3 times x plus 1? The answer is obvious again, it's 3. All right. So this is my factored form, right? This is the factored form of the trinomial 2x squared plus 5x plus 3. All right. So that's factoring by grouping. Let's try another example to really make sure we can handle this. All right. Let's look at 2x squared plus 9x plus 9. Once again, we're going to take a look at this middle term here, 9x. All right, and we're going to split that into two pieces, 6x plus 3x. All right. The GCF of these two terms is 2x. Okay. And the GCF of these two terms is 3. So in blue here, right, these two terms here, let's pull out a 2x, and we'll see that we're left with x plus 3. Okay? And then here in red, when we pull out a 3, we're left with x plus 3. Okay, put these together with an addition sign and take it to the top of the screen. All right. X plus 3 is the GCF of these two terms. Okay, so let's factor that out. All right. Then we ask x plus 3 times what equals this thing in blue? The answer is 2x. And then we ask x plus 3 times what equals this thing in red? The answer is obvious. It's just 3. Okay? So 2x squared plus 9x plus 9 equals x plus 3 times 2x plus 3. This is my final answer. All right? So now that we've seen factoring by grouping out on display, right, we can move to the AC method. All right, the AC method includes factoring by grouping. All right, it's a part of it. So let's break this down step by step. Okay, what does the AC method tell us to do? All right, given a trinomial in the form ax squared plus bx plus c, here's what we do. First, we list the factors of AC. All right, so we find the product AC and list all the possible factors. Then we find P and Q, all right, which is a pair of factors of AC with a sum of B. All right, so we're looking for two numbers that multiply together to give AC and they add together to give B. Okay, then we rewrite the original trinomial as this, right? So we're splitting BX into PX plus QX. All right, that's all we're doing there. And then steps 4 through 6, that's factoring by grouping. Okay, so we've seen this already. We factor out the GCF of these two terms, and we factor out the GCF of these two terms, and then we factor out the GCF of the entire expression. Okay? So let's try an example. Here we're asked to use the AC method to factor 5x squared plus 7x plus 6, minus 6. All right? So here we have A equals 5, B equals 7, and C equals negative 6. All right, these are the coefficients and the constant. All right. So in this case, we have AC equals 30, right? 5 times negative 6 is negative 30. All right. So our goal is to find P and Q, right? Two numbers with a product of negative 30 and a sum of 7. So to find those numbers, we need to list all the possible factors of negative 30. All right, let's do that in a table. All right, these are all the possibilities, right? 1 times negative 30, right, that's negative 30. Negative 1 times 30, right, that's negative 30. All of these multiply together to give negative 30. But the question is, which ones add together to give 7, right? We're looking for two numbers to add together to give 7, okay? And we can spot it down here at the bottom of the table, right? Negative 3 and 10 add together to give 7. Okay, so we'll choose P equals negative 3 and Q equals 10 for this example. All right, so here's my trinomial. All right, here's the term we're going to split into two pieces, right? 7x becomes negative 3x plus 10x. Okay, then we use factoring by grouping. Okay, the GCF of these two terms is x, and the GCF of these two terms is 2. All right, so let's factor out x here, and we're left with 5x minus 3. All right, those are the two blue terms. And here we factor out a 2, and we're left with 5x minus 3. All right, that's the factored form of these terms in red here. All right, let's join these together with a plus sign and take it to the top of the screen. All right, 5x minus 3 appears in both terms, right? So we're going to pull that out. All right, how do we fill these blanks? All right, I'm going to do this a little faster this time. Hope you don't mind. Right, we've seen how to do this. All right, and at this point we should be able to tell pretty much right away that to fill the blanks, we're going to put in x and 2. All right, so this trinomial in its factored form is 5x minus 3 times x plus 2, right? That's my final answer. All right, let's try one more example. use the AC method to factor this thing. Here we have a equals 6, b equals 1, and c equals -1. All right, the product AC is 6 times -1, right? So that's -6. All right, let's find p and q. Okay, to do that, we need to list all the possible factors of -6. All right, so here are the possibilities. Okay, we need them to sum together to give 1, right? Remember, there's an invisible 1 right here in front of this x. All right, we can spot it right here. 3 and -2 add together to give 1. Okay, so p is 3 and q is -2 here. Okay, let's split this middle term into two pieces, right? This is 3x minus 2x. Okay, 6x squared plus 3x, right? The GCF of those two terms is 3x. All right, but for these two terms, they don't really have a GCF, so we're just going to say it's 1. All right, we're going to pull out a 1 and see what we're left with. All right, so here in blue, we'll pull out a 3x, and we're left with 2x plus 1. Okay, and then here for these two red terms, right, we'll pull out a 1, and we're left with -2x minus 1. All right, add those together and take it to the top of the screen. All right, 2x plus 1 and -2x minus 1. We notice that those are super similar, right? Those are almost the same thing. All right, we just need to use some trickery to make them be the same. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to just say that this 1 here is unnecessary. All right, I can get rid of that. All right, and then what I'm going to do is factor out a -1 from these two terms. All right, when I do that, it leaves me with 2x plus 1 in parentheses. All right, so now these are the same, right? So we can pull it out. Okay, 2x plus 1 times something plus something equals this. All right, so we'll fill the blanks with 3x and -1. All right, and that's our factored form. 6x squared plus x minus 1 equals 2x plus 1 times 3x minus 1. All right, that's my final answer. All right, that does it for this video. Thank you for watching, and like and subscribe.